The first lie was a whisper, so soft and gentle I almost mistook it for loving concern. "You look exhausted, my love," David murmured one evening, his hand warm and familiar on my shoulder as I stood stirring pasta sauce at the stove. "Your work is really draining you lately." I was Serafina Vance, a freelance illustrator who worked from the beautiful, slightly ramshackle Victorian house I'd inherited from my grandmother. This house was more than wood and plaster. It was my sanctuary, filled with the ghosts of my happiest childhood memories and the tangible reality of a life I had built with careful intention. David, my husband of 10 years, was a financial manager. Handsome, reliable, the solid ground beneath my sometimes flighty artistic feet, or so I had believed for a decade. But the ground beneath me was beginning to shift in ways I couldn't yet comprehend. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly. He began working later, coming home with a new, permanent crease of worry between his brows that no amount of my massage could smooth away. He'd retreat to his study immediately after dinner, the definitive click of the lock a sound that became the ominous soundtrack to our evenings. "Just a rough patch at the firm, Sierra," he'd assure me with a weary, convincing smile. "The market is absolutely brutal right now. We might need to be a bit more cautious with our spending for a while." I, who had always been creatively messy with numbers and trusted him implicitly with our finances, agreed wholeheartedly. I cut back on art supplies, postponed upgrading my computer, and stopped suggesting weekend getaways, believing we were a unified team facing a temporary external storm. The storm, I would later learn with devastating clarity, was one he was meticulously manufacturing behind his locked study door. The belt-tightening soon evolved into a strategic chokehold. He called a solemn, family meeting one night, his face a masterpiece of grim apology. Our rustic kitchen table, usually a place of laughter, shared meals, and my scattered sketches, felt suddenly like a tribunal. "Sierra," he began, his voice low and serious as he took my hands in his. I noticed distantly that his palms were cold. "It's worse than I led you to believe. We're in real trouble. We're behind on the mortgage." The words landed like physical blows, nonsensical and terrifying. "David," I said, my voice thin and reedy with confusion, "that's not possible, you know that. The house was paid off with my inheritance. It's mine, free and clear. There is no mortgage." He was ready for this. He always had an answer. "Property taxes have skyrocketed. The new roof last year was double the estimate. That plumbing disaster in the guest bath. I had to take out a second mortgage to cover it all. I didn't want to worry you. I was trying to handle it to fix it myself." He looked so convincingly distraught, so heroically burdened by his secret efforts to protect his fragile, artistic wife, that my overwhelming concern for him momentarily eclipsed my own rising panic. Thus began the great, gaslit unraveling of my reality. Our life became a daily minefield of fabricated crises. Final notice envelopes from the bank, printed on ominously official paper, would appear in the mail. He would snatch them away with a hissed, "I'll handle it, don't upset yourself," before I could read them properly. He started having hushed, frantic phone calls in his study, his voice a desperate, pleading murmur I could barely hear through the door. "Please, you have to understand. Just one more month. I'm good for it, I swear." He sold my car, a beloved vintage convertible that was my pride and joy, claiming the cash was critically needed for a balloon payment to save the house from imminent foreclosure. I lived in a constant, grinding state of low-grade terror. The walls of my beloved home, once my ultimate source of comfort and stability, now felt like they were closing in on me, destined to be repossessed by some faceless, merciless entity. I walked on eggshells, trying desperately to be the supportive, understanding, uncomplaining wife, all while a silent, terrified scream was building in my throat. He was systematically isolating me, making me financially and emotionally dependent on his carefully curated narrative of our shared failure. I was so busy drowning in the crisis he had created, I never once thought to check if the water was real. He was the architect of the flood, and he had me utterly convinced I was the one who couldn't swim. The first crack in his perfectly constructed facade appeared on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday. He was at work, and I was cleaning with a frantic, nervous energy, trying to impose some semblance of order on the escalating chaos of our lives. When I moved his favorite leather armchair to vacuum beneath it, a single, crumpled envelope fell from its hiding place between the cushion and the frame. It was not addressed to our home. It was for a P.O. box, number 4821, a number I had never seen before. But the name on it, printed with cold clarity, was mine, Serafina Vance. A cold, sharp trickle of unease, entirely different from the vague, diffuse anxiety I'd been feeling for months, traced its way down my spine. I smoothed the paper against my thigh, my hands trembling. It was a credit card statement. For a platinum tier card I did not possess, had never applied for. The charges listed were a ledger of a secret life. Lavish dinners at restaurants I'd only ever read about, weekend stays at luxury hotels in the city, substantial purchases from high-end boutiques and jewelers, all dated for precise weekends when David had been away on his business trips. This was not a statement of debt. This was a map of a double life, a carefully documented trail of betrayal. The familiar fear in my gut curdled into something darker, more potent, a sickening, ice-cold suspicion. But the true earthquake, the seismic event that shattered my world into a million irreparable pieces, arrived a week later with the mundane ring of the doorbell. A uniformed delivery man handed me a thick, weighty, official-looking envelope from the county recorder's office. My heart seized, a frantic bird trapped in the cage of my ribs. This was it. The final, unequivocal foreclosure notice. The end of my home, my sanctuary, my past, and my future. My hands trembled so violently I could barely tear the stiff paper open. The language inside was dense, legalistic, a wall of impenetrable jargon. I forced myself to read it slowly, painstakingly, word by confusing word. And then I read it again, my mind refusing, again and again, to process what my eyes were clearly seeing. It was not a foreclosure notice. It was a notice of a title transfer. The document stated, in cold black and white, that the property at my address, which had been solely and unquestionably in my name for years, had been legally transferred into the joint names of Serafina Vance and David Vance precisely 6 months ago. Furthermore, and this is where the room began to tilt, a new mortgage for $350,000 had been taken out against the property. The floor fell away beneath my feet. I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter, my knuckles white, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps that didn't seem to bring any oxygen. A new mortgage? A title transfer? How? I had never signed anything. I would never, ever have signed away half of my grandmother's legacy, half of the only true security I had in this world. I stumbled to my filing cabinet, my legs weak and uncoordinated, and pulled out the heavy fireproof box where I kept our most important documents. My fingers were numb, fumbling with the simple combination lock. There it was, the original deed, clear as day. Serafina Vance, a single woman. I laid the new, terrifying document from the recorder's office beside it. The signature granting him half of my home, half of my history, was a forgery. It was a good imitation, a practiced one, but it was undeniably wrong. The looping, confident flourish on the capitals of my first name was too wide, too theatrical. I am an artist. My signature is a quick, efficient mark. I would never sign my name with such a flamboyant, time-consuming loop. The truth, the whole, ugly, monstrous truth, crashed over me with the physical force of a tidal wave. There was no debt crisis. There was no failing market at his firm. There was only theft, a cold, calculated, premeditated robbery executed with breathtaking patience. He had forged my name to get his on the deed to my house, then taken out a massive loan against it, pocketing the entire $350,000. The financial ruin, the hushed phone calls, the fake final notices. It was all an elaborate stage play, a cruel and emotionally exhaustive pantomime designed to keep me docile, terrified, and utterly dependent on his narrative while he waited for the loan to finalize and the money to clear. Then he would have left me, saddled with a debt I could never hope to repay, forcing a sale of the one thing I loved most. He would have walked away with half the proceeds from my inheritance, plus the $350,000 he had stolen. I would have been left with nothing. No home, no money, no future, completely and utterly destitute. A raw, guttural sound was torn from my throat, a hybrid of a heartbroken sob and a roar of pure, undiluted rage. The betrayal was so absolute, so venomous, it felt like a poison crystallizing in my veins, sharp and permanent. David wasn't just a liar. He was a thief. A conman who had, for a decade, been married to his Mark. And now the Mark had seen the con, and the Mark was ready to fight back. The woman who crumpled to the cold hardwood floor that afternoon, surrounded by the ghosts of her grandmother and the evidence of her husband's treachery, was gone. In her place rose a stranger, a creature of ice and resolve, her heart hardened into a weapon, her grief forged into a cold, focused fury. I would not confront him. Not yet. To do so would be to start a war with a warning shot, to give him time to cover his tracks, to spin new lies, to vanish with the money. I needed to be smarter, more patient, more ruthless than he had ever been. I needed to lay a trap so airtight, so laden with irrefutable evidence, that his fate would be legally sealed before he even knew he was in danger. The first thing I did, with hands that had steadied remarkably, was carefully place all the documents back exactly as I had found them. Then, I became an actress of Oscar-worthy caliber in my own home. When David returned from work, I was the perfect picture of weary, trusting concern. "Any news from the bank?" I asked, layering my voice with the now familiar tremor of fear he had taught me. He sighed, the very image of the burdened, noble provider. "It's not looking good, Sierra, but I'm handling it. You just focus on your art." He leaned in to kiss my forehead, and I forced every muscle in my body to remain pliant, to not recoil from the treacherous monster wearing my husband's skin. The performance was the most difficult thing I had ever done. Under the guise of tidying up to reduce my stress, I began a clandestine, forensic inventory of our lives. I used my phone to photograph everything: the forged deed, the hidden credit card statement, the fake final notices he deliberately left lying around. Late at night, when his breathing was deep and regular, I would venture into his study, using a thin letter opener to gently jimmy the locked drawer of his desk. Inside, I struck a vein of gold. Bank statements for accounts I never knew existed, all linked to the mysterious P.O. box, showing massive, sequential cash deposits that corresponded perfectly with the disbursement dates of the fraudulent mortgage. I knew I couldn't do this alone. I didn't need a divorce lawyer. I needed a general, a strategist who waged war in courtrooms. After discreet inquiries, I found Alina Rossi, a petite, impeccably dressed woman whose reputation was built on the smoldering ruins of fraudulent men's lives and fortunes. In her stark, minimalist office, where the only decoration was a single, sharp piece of modern art, I laid out my story and my evidence like a prosecutor presenting a case before a judge. She listened, her sharp, intelligent eyes missing nothing, her expression unreadable. When I finished, the silence was heavy. She steepled her fingers. "Serafina, let's be very clear," she said, her voice calm and precise. "This is not a marital dispute. This is a multi-count criminal indictment waiting to happen. We're talking about grand larceny in the first-degree criminal possession of a forged instrument and scheme to defraud. We will be taking this directly to the district attorney. But first," she said, her gaze intensifying, "we need to follow the money. A paper trail is good. A digital one is bulletproof." She introduced me to Ben, a forensic accountant who was a ghost in the machine, a man who spoke the quiet, unassailable language of numbers and algorithms. Ben took my folder of documents and began his work, tracing the path of the $350,000. It was a complex international shell game, he explained. The money had been wired from the mortgage company to a joint account David had secretly opened using the forged deed, then swiftly funneled through a series of 3 obscure, shell limited liability companies before a significant portion, $300,000, vanished into a numbered offshore account in the Cayman Islands. "He's not spending it on hotels and dinners," Ben said, pointing to a complex digital flowchart on his massive monitor. "That credit card was a decoy small change. He's hiding the real score. He's building a war chest for his new life, a life without you." The final, cinching piece of the puzzle came from an unexpected source. Remembering the P.O. box, I went to the post office, my heart pounding. I didn't have a key, but I had my driver's license and a well-rehearsed story about having lost mine. The clerk, a sympathetic woman around my age, retrieved the small bundle of mail. Among the credit card offers and catalogs was a glossy trifold brochure. It was for Paraíso Perdido, a luxury, gated community in Costa Rica, featuring stunning villas and pristine beaches. It was addressed in bold print to David Vance at the P.O. box. The final piece clicked into place. He wasn't just stealing my money. He was planning a tropical paradise for one, a permanent vacation funded entirely by the deliberate and heartless destruction of my life. I now possessed the complete, damning picture. The forged document, the secret financial trail, the evidence of his double life, and the tangible blueprint for his escape. He fancied himself a criminal mastermind. In reality, he was a bumbling, arrogant amateur, and I was about to become the primary reason he received a long, state-funded education in penitentiary living. We did not file for divorce. Eleanor, with the cool efficiency of a sniper, filed a comprehensive criminal complaint with the district attorney's office, backed by Ben's ironclad forensic report and my meticulously gathered, cross-referenced dossier. The DA, recognizing a solid, winnable case, moved with stunning speed. David was at his sleek, downtown office, likely dreaming of Central American sunsets and frozen cocktails, when two plainclothes detectives from the Financial Crimes Unit walked in. His secretary, a longtime friend of mine, called me the moment it happened, her voice a hushed, excited whisper. She described the scene in vivid detail, his confident, smarmy smile freezing, then shattering into a mask of sheer, unadulterated panic as they flashed their badges and read him his Miranda rights. The charges echoed in his plush, corner office, bouncing off the glass walls: grand larceny in the first degree, criminal possession of a forged instrument, scheme to defraud. He was granted bail, a fact that made my blood boil, but the man who returned home was a hollowed-out ghost of his former self. His slick arrogance had been replaced by a frantic, cornered-animal desperation. "Sierra," he pleaded, his hands shaking so violently the ice cubes in his scotch clinked like tiny alarm bells. "This is a catastrophic misunderstanding. You have to talk to the DA. You have to tell them you must have signed those papers without reading them properly." You were so stressed, so overwhelmed. I looked at him from my seat on the sofa, my posture unnervingly calm, my hands folded in my lap. "The signature, David," I said, my voice flat and devoid of all the emotion he expected. "This in Serafina. The loop is all wrong. It's too wide. I am an artist. I know my own mark. I would never make that mistake." The blood drained from his face, leaving him a sickly, waxy pale. He hadn't known I'd discovered the deed. He thought he was still the brilliant puppeteer, and I his hapless marionette. The realization that I had been silently pulling the strings all along, that I had been the hunter while he thought he was the hunter, dawned in his eyes, followed by a wave of pure, impotent hatred. "What have you done?" he whispered, the words laced with a venom I now realized had always been there, simmering beneath the surface. "I presented the truth," I replied, my gaze steady on his. "You tried to steal my home and leave me with nothing but debt and despair. Now the state is offering you a new address. I hear the views aren't nearly as nice, and the room service is notoriously slow." Faced with the insurmountable mountain of evidence, the forensic accounting, the forged deed, the P.O. box, the Costa Rican brochures, his lawyer strongly advised him to plead guilty. In a courtroom that smelled of polished wood, stale coffee, and stark, impersonal justice, he stood before the judge head-bowed and admitted his crimes. At his sentencing, I was given the right to make a victim impact statement. I stood, my knees steady, my voice clear and resonant as it filled the silent, packed room. "Your Honor," I began, my gaze fixed on David, who refused to look up from the table. "David Vance didn't just steal my money. He stole my security, my ability to trust, and the sacred legacy my grandmother left for me. He weaponized my love and my trust, and he used them as the primary tools for my financial and emotional destruction. He didn't just want to leave me. He wanted to erase me, to reduce me to a cautionary tale." I turned to him fully then, ensuring he could feel the weight of my stare. "You thought I was weak. You thought your plan was brilliant, foolproof, but you made one fatal error. You taught me how to fight for my home, for my very survival, and I am a very, very fast learner." The judge, a stern woman with no-nonsense eyes, sentenced him to 5 to 10 years in a state penitentiary. As the bailiff stepped forward and clamped the cold, hard steel of the handcuffs around his wrists, the finality of the sound echoing in the room, he finally met my eyes. There was no apology, no flicker of remorse. Only the stunned, bitter fury of a man who had been utterly and completely outsmarted, outmaneuvered, and outclassed by the woman he'd considered a foolish, easy target. In the aftermath, the state successfully seized the $350,000 from his labyrinth of offshore accounts and returned it to the mortgage company, who released the lien on my house. The title was legally and formally restored to my name, and his name was scrubbed from the property records as if he had never existed there, a fitting and legal expungement of his toxic presence from my life. The silence in my house now is a peaceful, powerful thing. It is my silence. I repainted every room in warm, vibrant colors, exorcising the gloomy, oppressive atmosphere he had cultivated. His sterile, locked study is now my sun-drenched, wonderfully chaotic art studio, flooded with morning light and filled with the honest, beautiful mess of creation. The scent of clay, turpentine, and possibility a cleansing balm for my soul. The man who tried to make me homeless is now a long-term resident of a state correctional facility, his freedom and reputation forfeit. The poetic justice is so absolute, so perfectly calibrated, it feels like divine intervention. He sought to build his glittering future on the desolate ruins of mine. Instead, I used the very blueprint of his betrayal, the very documents he forged, to construct an impenetrable fortress around my life, my home, and my future peace. He forged my signature to steal my home, and in doing so, he meticulously, arrogantly forged his own path straight to a prison cell. I didn't just get my house back. I took back my power, my peace, and my future, and I made sure the door to that poisonous past was locked, bolted, and the key was melted down forever.